Mississippi, ɛmɪsɨʻsɪpi, is a state located in the southern United States. Jackson is the state capital and largest city, with a population of around 175,000 people. The state overall has a population of around 3 million people. Mississippi is the 32nd most extensive and the 32nd most populous of the 50 United States. The state is heavily forested outside of the Mississippi Delta area. Its riverfront areas were cleared for slave-cultivated cotton production before the American Civil War, but after the war, the bottomlands were cleared, mostly by freedmen. African Americans made up two-thirds of the property owners in the Delta by the end of the 19th century. But timber and railroad companies acquired much of the land. Clearing altered the ecology of the Delta, increasing the severity of flooding along the Mississippi. Much land is now held by agribusinesses. A largely rural state with agricultural areas dominated by industrial farms. Mississippi is ranked low or last among the states in such measures as health, educational attainment, and median household income. The state's catfish aquaculture farms produce the majority of farm-raised catfish consumed in the United States. Since the 1930s and the Great Migration, Mississippi has been majority white, albeit with the highest percentage of black residents of any U.S. state. From the early 19th century to that period, its citizenry was mostly black, a population that was composed largely of African American slaves before the American Civil War. In the first half of the 20th century, a total of nearly 400,000 rural blacks left the state for work and opportunities in northern and midwestern cities, with another wave of migration around World War II to West Coast cities. In 2010, 37% of Mississippians were African Americans, the highest percentage of African Americans in a U.S. state. African Americans are still a majority in many counties of the Mississippi Yazoo Delta, an area of historic settlement during the plantation era. Since 2011, Mississippi has been ranked as the most religious state in the country. Etymology. The name of the state is derived from the Mississippi River, which flows along its western boundary. Settlers named it after the Ojibwe word ʻmɪsɨʻsɪpi. Geography. Mississippi is bordered on the north by Tennessee, on the east by Alabama, on the south by Louisiana and a narrow coast on the Gulf of Mexico, and on the west, across the Mississippi River, by Louisiana and Arkansas. In addition to its namesake, major rivers in Mississippi include the Big Black River, the Pearl River, the Yazoo River, the Pascagoula River, and the Tombigbee River. Major lakes include Ross Barnett Reservoir, Butler Lake, Sardis Lake, and Grenada Lake. The largest lake in Mississippi is Sardis Lake. The state of Mississippi is entirely composed of lowlands, the highest point being Woodall Mountain, in the foothills of the Cumberland Mountains, 807 feet above sea level. The lowest point is sea level at the Gulf Coast. The mean elevation in the state is 300 feet above sea level. Most of Mississippi is a part of the East Gulf Coastal Plain. The coastal plain is generally composed of low hills, such as the Pine Hills in the south and the North Central Hills. The Pontotoc Ridge and the Fall Line Hills in the northeast have somewhat higher elevations. Yellow-brown loess soil is found in the western parts of the state. The Northeast is a region of fertile black earth that extends into the Alabama Black Belt. The coastline includes large bays at Bay Street, Lewis, Biloxi, and Pascagoula. It is separated from the Gulf of Mexico proper by the shallow Mississippi Sound, which is partially sheltered by Petit Bois Island, Horn Island, East and West Ship Islands, Deer Island, Round Island, and Cat Island. The northwest remainder of the state consists of the Mississippi Delta, a section of the Mississippi alluvial plain. The plain is narrow in the south and widens north of Vicksburg. The region has rich soil, partly made up of silt which had been regularly deposited by the floodwaters of the Mississippi River. Areas under the management of the National Park Service include Bryce's Crossroads National Battlefield Site near Baldwin, Gulf Island National Seashore, Natchez National Historical Park in Natchez, Natchez Trace National Scenic Trail in Tupelo, Natchez Trace Parkway, Tupelo National Battlefield in Tupelo, Vicksburg National Military Park and Cemetery in Vicksburg. Major cities and towns. Mississippi city population rankings of at least 50,000. Jackson, Gulfport, Mississippi city population rankings of at least 20,000 but fewer than 50,000. South Haven, Hattiesburg, Biloxi, Vicksburg, Meridian, Tupelo, Greenville, Olive Branch, Horn Lake, Clinton, Pearl, Madison, Richland, Starkville, Columbus, Pascagoula, Brandon. Mississippi city population rankings of at least 10,000 but fewer than 20,000. Oxford, Gautier, Laurel, Clarksdale, Ocean Springs, Natchez, Greenwood, Long Beach, Corinth, Hernando, Moss Point, Canton, Grenada, Macomb, Brookhaven, Cleveland, Byram, Yazoo City, West Point, Picayune, Indianola, Petal. Climate. Mississippi has a humid subtropical climate with long summers and short, mild winters. Temperatures average about 81 degrees Fahrenheit in July and about 48 degrees Fahrenheit in January. The temperature varies little statewide in the summer, however, in winter. The region near Mississippi Sound is significantly warmer than the inland portion of the state. The recorded temperature in Mississippi has ranged from -19 degrees Fahrenheit in 1966 at Corinth in the northeast, to 115 degrees Fahrenheit in 1930 at Holly Springs in the north. Heavy snowfall is possible across the state, such as during the New Year's Eve 1963 snowstorm. Yearly precipitation generally increases from north to south, with the regions closer to the Gulf being the most humid. Thus, Clarksdale, in the northwest, gets about 50 inches of precipitation annually, and Biloxi, in the south, about 61 inches. Small amounts of snow fall in northern and central Mississippi. Snow is occasional in the southern part of the state. The late summer and fall is the seasonal period of risk for hurricanes moving inland from the Gulf of Mexico, especially in the southern part of the state. Both cause nearly total storm surge destruction of structures in and around Gulfport, Biloxi, and Pascagoula. As in the rest of the Deep South, thunderstorms are common in Mississippi, especially in the southern part of the state. On average, Mississippi has around 27 tornadoes annually. The northern part of the state has more tornadoes earlier in the year, and the southern part a higher frequency later in the year. 2 of the 5 deadliest tornadoes in U.S. history have occurred in the state. These storms struck Natchez, in southwest Mississippi, and Tupelo, in the northeast corner of the state. About 7 F5 tornadoes have been recorded in the state. Ecology. Mississippi is heavily forested, with over half of the state's area covered by wild trees, including mostly pine, as well as cottonwood, elm, hickory, oak, pecan, sweet gum and tupelo. Ecological problems. Flooding due to seasonal flooding, possible from December to June. The Mississippi and Yazoo rivers created a fertile floodplain in the Mississippi Delta, including tributaries. To try to prevent flooding of land cultivated for cotton crops, planters used temporary workers to build levees along the Mississippi River to control flooding. They built on top of the natural levees that formed from dirt deposited after the river flooded. As cultivation of cotton increased in the Delta, planters hired Irish laborers, who immigrated in high numbers in the 1840s as a result of the Great Famine, to ditch and drain their land. The state took over levee building from 1858 to 1861, accomplishing it through contractors and hired labor. In those years, planters considered their slaves too valuable to hire out for such dangerous work. Contractors hired gangs of Irish immigrant laborers to build levees and sometimes clear land. Many of the Irish were relatively recent immigrants from the famine years who were struggling to get established. Before the American Civil War, the earthwork levees averaged 6 feet in height, although in some areas they reached 20 feet. Flooding has been an integral part of Mississippi history, but clearing of the land for cultivation and to supply wood fuel for steamboats took away the absorption of trees and undergrowth. The banks of the river were denuded, becoming unstable and changing the character of the river. After the Civil War, major floods swept down the valley in 1865, 1867, 1874 and 1882. Such floods regularly overwhelmed levees damaged by Confederate and Union fighting during the war, as well as those constructed after the war. In 1877, the state created the Mississippi Levee District for southern counties. In 1879, the United States Congress created the Mississippi River Commission, whose responsibilities included aiding state levee boards in the construction of levees. Both white and black transient workers were hired to build the levees in the late 19th century. By 1882, levees averaged 7 feet in height, but many in the southern delta were severely tested by the flood that year. After the 1882 flood, the levee system was expanded. In 1884, the Yazoo, Mississippi Delta Levee District was established to oversee levee construction and maintenance in the northern Delta counties, also included were some counties in Arkansas. Flooding overwhelmed northwestern Mississippi in 1912-1913, causing heavy damage to the levee districts. Regional losses and the Mississippi River Levee Association's lobbying for a flood control bill helped gain passage of national bills in 1917 in 1923 to provide federal matching funds for local levee districts, on a scale of 2 to 1, although U.S. participation in World War I interrupted funding of levees. The second round of funding helped raise the average height of levees in the Mississippi Yazoo Delta to 22 feet in the 1920s. Scientists now understand the levees have increased the severity of flooding, and the region was severely damaged due to the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. There were losses of millions of dollars in property, stock and crops. The most damage occurred in the lower delta, including Washington and Bolivar counties. Even as scientific knowledge about the Mississippi River has grown, upstream development and the consequences of the levees have caused more severe flooding in some years. Scientists now understand that the widespread clearing of land and building of the levees have changed the nature of the river. Such work removed the natural protection and absorption of wetlands and forest cover, strengthening the river's current. The state and federal governments have been struggling for the best approaches to restore some natural habitats in order to best interact with the original riverine ecology.